Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 15 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation D.A.T.E. We begin this segment with number 1 summoning the rest of the Sector V operatives into the central control room of the treehouse. Number 1 tells his teammates that they've received a very important message. The message, though, seems to be an invitation to the Kids All-Town Cotillion, which the other Sector V operatives describe as one of the biggest events in the town. And number 1, however, points out that the event is being hosted by the delightful children from down the lane, and it actually will take place at the delightful children's mansion. At first, the other Sector V operatives wonder if this means that they won't be able to attend the Cotillion, but number 1 says that they are going to attend the Cotillion, but number 1's motives are to see what the delightful children are truly up to. But the Sector V operatives, the other Sector V operatives, I should clarify, are just excited to go to the Cotillion in the first place. Number 1 says that in an effort for them to number 1 says that in order to make it so others are not suspicious of their true intentions, for being at the Cotillion, number 1 thinks it's a good idea for them to couple up, as he puts it in his words. But number 1 is surprised to see that his teammates have quickly paired up already. Number 2 and number 5 decided to go together as a couple, and number 3 and number 4 have agreed to go together as a couple. So this leaves number 1 in need of someone to couple up with for the event. So number 1 ends up calling his girlfriend, Lizzie Devine, and number 1 he sounds awkward at first when he first starts the call, but later on, he gains his stride when he says that the kids next door need Lizzie for a very important mission, and if Lizzie chooses to accept the mission, she will be given the designated number, or the code name, of number 49. And Lizzie, however, interrupts number 1's speech to say that she would love to go on a date with him. And although number 1 wants to clarify that it's not a date, number 3 interrupts him and tells Lizzie that they'll pick her up at, I believe they said 7 o'clock. And number 3 also offers some advice about what sort of outfit to wear for the Cotillion. So eventually, nighttime rolls around, and we're at the delightful children's mansion now. So we do see some kids are being dropped off by their parents at the delightful children's mansion for the Cotillion, but then we see the Sector V operatives and Lizzie arrive in a flying vehicle that's been modeled after a limo. And so when the Sector V operatives and Lizzie exit the limo, we do get to see a little bit more about number 1 trying to take this seriously as a mission. Like, he gave Lizzie a corsage, but the corsage also acts as a communication device, so Lizzie can contact number 1 through the corsage if she needs to relay any important information. Although Lizzie just thinks it's a corsage, and doesn't really seem to pay number 1 much attention when he tries to explain about its purpose as a communication device. So as the Sector V operatives and Lizzie enter the delightful children's mansion, they do see that the delightful children are actually just outside of the ballroom area to greet the guests. And when when the Sector V operatives and Lizzie arrive in front of the Delightful Children, the Delightful Children take a moment to say how they're pleased to see Nigel Uno and his friends have arrived. Number one makes it clear to the Delightful Children that he knows they are up to something, and he has his eyes, or he intends to keep his eyes peeled for any trouble that the Delightful Children will try to pull. But the Delightful Children respond that they only wish to have fun with the guests, and reiterating that the Delightful Children also mention that the event is filled with free entertainment and free food and beverages for all the guests. Number one is still not convinced about the Delightful Children's sincerity, but the rest of his teammates and Lizzie want to enter the ballroom already. The Delightful Children also take a moment to mock number one by calling him Nigel. So when they enter the ballroom, number one is quickly shown to still be on edge and still fearful about what the Delightful Children really intend to do. But so far, nothing seems to be out of place. Number 5 tries to assure number 1 that she is keeping her eyes peeled, but she says that so far everything just seems to be a regular event so far. Nothing seems to be out of the ordinary just yet. And number 2 tries to assure number 1 that they'll take care of any threats that do come up. In the meantime, number 1 should just enjoy his date. So we then get a montage which shows number 1 and Lizzie during, number 1 and Lizzie's time at the Cotillion, but number 1 is still a bit paranoid about the Delightful Children's ulterior motives for hosting the event. Eventually, it gets to the point where number 1 and Lizzie are dancing in the ballroom, but it looks like they're the only guests present in the ballroom right now, though number 1 seems to have calmed down a bit. Eventually, Lizzie notices that pictures are being taken in a different room, and Lizzie wants an official picture for the event, so Lizzie brings number 1 to the picture room. But just as the picture is about to be taken, number 1 realizes that the Delightful Children are the ones taking the pictures, and number 1 quickly gets Lizzie out of the way before the beam hits them. The Delightful Children are impressed with number 1, figuring out that it isn't really a picture-taking device, but says that number 1 is, the Delightful Children say that it's a shame that no one else figured this out, at least from number 1's perspective. We do find out what the device truly is, because when the curtains pull back in the room, we see the other guests now are wearing the outfits that the Delightful Children are wearing, not to mention they do have the same blue eyes as the Delightful Children as well. This device is actually a delightfulization ray, which, as you can probably guess from the name, is a ray that turns kids into delightfulized versions of themselves, pretty much like the Delightful Children themselves. And number 1 says the Delightful Children said they only wanted to have fun. The Delightful Children clarify that this is their idea of fun, and they order their now delightfulized minions to take number 1 and Lizzie so they can end up with the same fate. Number 1 tries to get Lizzie out of the event as quickly as possible. Lizzie still doesn't seem to fully understand the full severity of their current situation and keeps insisting on having an official photo. And while they're trying to escape, number 1 sees his teammates have been delightfulized already as well. So eventually, number 1 is able to, number 1 takes Lizzie to a closet so they can hide in the closet to try and figure out a plan while trying to evade the delightfulized minions. Unfortunately, Lizzie is talking loud enough where the delightfulized minions can hear them, So the other Sector V operatives, now delightfulized, as well as the other delightfulized kids, are walking towards the closet that they're hiding in. Lizzie decided to just use her own camera to take a picture instead because number one didn't want the official photo. Again, Lizzie doesn't seem to fully realize the severity of the situation that they're in. And just as the delightfulized minions open up the door of the closet, Lizzie takes the picture, but we soon see through the picture itself that the other Sector V operatives have been restored to normal, as well as the other kids within the range of the picture. Number one realizes that one flash neutralizes the other flash, so number one takes Lizzie's camera and he adds it to one of his 2x4 technology devices. So number one uses this combination of Lizzie's camera and the 2x4 technology device to take pictures of the rest of the delightfulized minions in order to undo the delightfulization ray. So now they're all back to normal but confused. Number one instructs his teammates to escort all of the other guests out of the Delightful Children's mansion while they can. Number one says he will personally deal with the Delightful Children himself. But before he can confront them in the room that they're in, Lizzie tells number one that this has been a pretty bad date so far. Or saying how, Lizzie goes on Lizzie explains that she hasn't really enjoyed how number one's been focusing on other things during the night, and how he doesn't want to get an official photo, but he takes everyone else's photos or pictures with her camera, and saying that if he doesn't turn things around by the end of the date, he won't get to walk her home. But finally, number one snaps at Lizzie that it isn't a date, and he doesn't really care if she thought it was a date or not because he has more pressing matters to attend to than dealing with someone who is, in his words, date crazy. And number one storms off to confront the Delightful Children after this. The other Sector V operatives try to get everyone out of the rest of the guests out of the room because they notice Lizzie is shaken or upset by what number one has said, although it's more frozen silence on Lizzie's current reaction. Yeah, Lizzie's current reaction is more frozen silence than anything else. So number one enters the room where the Delightful Children are to confront them, but he soon finds out that the Delightful Children have more delightfulization rays than they initially let on. So number one is at a real disadvantage right now. But before anything can happen, Lizzie, with a cup of punch, storms the room demanding to speak to Nigel Uno. The Delightful Children are baffled by this interruption, but Lizzie actually snaps at the Delightful Children to shut up, much to their baffled surprise. And Lizzie says that this has been the worst date she's ever been on, and that she can't stand, and that she's upset that number one had humiliated her in front of other guests. And Lizzie declares number one in her words, big bad date, and tosses the punch towards number one. Number one, however, dodges the punch, and the punch ends up hitting some wiring or circuitry, which starts to blow up the delightfulization rays. Number one hugs Lizzie in response, telling her that she's brilliant, and Lizzie actually is rather appreciates this, questioning number one if that was so hard to do, in her words. So number one, Lizzie and the Delightful Children manage to escape the mansion before the before the explosion for the wirings is complete. And they all gather. Number one, Lizzie and the Delightful Children end up joining the rest of the guests at the top of a hill near the Delightful Children's mansion. And then the explosions happen in the form of fireworks. A kid questions the Delightful Children about don't they just enjoy fireworks, in the kid's words, and the delightful children just glare at the kid. And the segment ends with number one holding Lizzie's hand as he's watching the fireworks with everyone else. So this segment is Lizzie's first season 2 appearance, and this is another major appearance with Lizzie in the role. And yeah, I did mention it before, it was really more in season 2 when Lizzie became more of an ally than an enemy of the kids next door, because she was really only more of an antagonist in her first appearance, Operation Lizzie. But here, she's more of an ally. And yes, for this segment, that's right, I also mentioned this before, but when you first watch the segment, and yeah, for the longest time, it did seem more like Lizzie was just unaware of just exactly how severe the event was, and the delightful children's true motives behind the Cotillion. But yeah, with the revelation about Lizzie's true identity and true motives, again, I hesitate to say anything more for the sake of those who haven't seen the teaser regarding the possibility of the sequel series or the spin-off series. I hesitate to say anything more for the sake of those who haven't seen it yet, but once again, that teaser, which reveals Lizzie's true identity, definitely puts Lizzie's actions in this segment in a completely different light. Let's just say it's strongly implied that Lizzie may have been more aware of the situation than she let on, and that the way she acted in this segment, and other segments for that matter, was more of just an act. So it definitely puts Lizzie's true motives into question, or what Lizzie really had been thinking during the segment into question. And so yeah, it's definitely, that stood out to me the most when I recently rewatched this for the recap and thoughts video. Just it definitely puts Lizzie's character in a different light with this new information about her true motives. Otherwise, the segment also showed us how number 2 and number 5, and number 3 and number 4 respectively, were all able to quickly decide on coupling up with each other for the kids' all-town cotillion. And yeah, that definitely was a good looking back on it now, this is definitely, one could definitely say that this is a good example of foreshadowing regarding regarding the ending of the series. I'm sure you'll know what I mean once we eventually reach the series finale in the recap and thoughts videos. But otherwise, yeah, there isn't really too much else to say for this particular segment. We have Lizzie and the Delightful Children make their appearances in season 2, and like I said, it's definitely interesting seeing Lizzie's character and how she acted now that we know her true identity and her true motives. And I did like the foreshadowing regarding number 2 and number 5 and number 3 and number 4 being so easily willing to couple up with each other for the event. And yeah, we did get to see a little bit more of number 1 being properly paranoid, and number 1 being properly paranoid, because he ended up being right that the Delightful Children were up to no good for this event. But otherwise, yeah, I would say that's it for this particular segment. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment of episode 15 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.